Greetings all, and welcome to this satellite video conference and webcast produced by the San Diego Global Knowledge University in conjunction with its subsidiary, the International Training Center, ITC, of San Diego, California. I'd like to thank and acknowledge the entire SDGKU team operating under the very creative and capable direction of Dr. Miguel Cardenas, SDGKU founder and executive director. My professional background is in information systems technology management. Specifically, my main area of focus is in the realm of networked information and communications technology, ICT. I work in both the domestic and international arena, training corporate executives and managers on how to proficiently develop, implement, and manage their information resources to more effectively carry out their organizational missions. Operating in a synergistically networked environment made possible by the connecting properties provided by the ICT for organizations and their people to form communities of linked interest that create a stronger synergism of effort. These networks can more efficiently leverage the physical and intellectual capital of the member organizations and their people, and I am both a student of and an active participant in the design, development, and implementation of the technological strategies and applications which are intrinsically involved in the rapidly changing international business landscape. My goal for today's presentation is to share with this esteemed group what I have seen as an evolving trend for participation in the supercharged growth taking place in the realm of internationally oriented organizational networked collaborations. I am eager to share with you the observations of several research efforts regarding the era of information-oriented, cloud-based, value web networks, which will indeed impact all of our lives on a global basis. In this module, we will examine the concept of network management theories from an operational perspective. We will focus our attention on a specific set of global incidences that will greatly magnify our ability to observe the apparent levels of effectiveness regarding the response ability of collaborative networks in action. And in another module, we will advance a set of proposed stratagems for the lessons learned for these observations for the effective development and management of multi-faction, interactive, networked cooperatives. The recent research by my colleague Shamin Hitoun on managerial networked response effectiveness illuminates a very interesting set of conditions that can negatively impact disaster response via the suboptimization of their inter-organizational networks in action. Her study of networks engaged in the explicit mission of disaster response generalizes quite nicely to the systems laws associated with most operational networks, regardless of networks' mission-oriented purposes. Hitoun reports that natural disasters are striking at an alarming rate and creating havoc in many parts of the world. Since the beginning of time, there have been tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tsunamis that have created and claimed the lives of caused considerable damage to the landscape and the economy of countries worldwide. But recently, these have become more frequent. For example, in April 2011, there were 312 tornadoes in 24 hours in the United States. In March 2011, an earthquake of 8.9 magnitude hit Japan and caused a major tsunami. Major earthquakes and varying magnitudes were also reported in Argentina, China, Chile, Japan, Iran, United States, California, New Zealand, Vanuatu, Burma, Thailand, South Sandwich Islands, Fiji, Indonesia, Mexico, and Papua New Guinea during the past few years. There have been major floods in Australia and Brazil. Tornadoes have also hit New Zealand, causing considerable damage, as reported in 2011 by The Guardian. These disasters created chaos, mayhem, and depending on the magnitude of the disaster, varying degrees of damage and loss of life. Agencies with different capabilities and levels of expertise join together to intervene and to provide aid and remediation at these disaster sites. They link up to help victims survive and deal with the aftermath of natural disasters. And their number one tool in these critical times is their information and communications technology networks, which provide the responders with the ability to collect, analyze, and communicate information in real time. In a post-disaster situation, multiple agencies, often representing the governments, state and federal, private companies, and NGOs with different strategies and management styles and tools, come together at the disaster site and are expected to cooperate. In most cases, quick and effective emergency cooperation is made difficult because of a separation between the individual agency's goals. In terms of evaluating the network responses of individual agencies, whose goals are oftentimes determined by the desire to avoid blame and liability, posturing for bureaucratic or public acclaim, and politicking for control of resources or for controlling the role versus other responding agencies, creates competition rather than increasing cooperation. The goal of most information systems technology, IST, architectures are today, and all collaborative networks, is to achieve synergistic leverage multipliers and to provide an interactive value to reap the networked advantages. The advantages of networked organizations over the more traditional standalone single mission-oriented operations are significant. Government agencies, non-government organizations, and corporate entities will reap a substantial operational leverage through the effective deployment of a network-based association. Let's briefly review some of the major tenets associated with a typical network operation. Robert Metcalfe, founder of 3Com Corporation and the architect of the Ethernet protocol for computer networks, formulated Metcalfe's law, which states the usefulness of a network equals the square of the number of its users. Michael Porter, in his pioneering work regarding the concept of the value chain, created an organizational vehicle for harnessing the power of Metcalfe's law. By becoming a member of a value chain, a network, or web as an individual or as an organizational entity, the synergistic relationships suggested by Metcalfe's law can be realized. The more effectively these relationships are formed and maintained, the greater the potential for organic growth and its byproduct, the leverage multiplier. The links of value chain network or value web are forged by the formation of personal and professional business relationships. The organic building and maintenance of a value chain is expedited by the proficient deployment and management of the existing information technologies. It is the cloud-based ICT that serves as the connecting nerve centers of networked organizations and literally pumps the network's nutrients throughout the entire system. The information that flows through these systems' veins via organized patterns of electrons is the network's life's blood. Without these interactive, orderly, structured operations among diverse groups, agencies, and professional associations, network leverages would be impossible. Careful construction of the web-based network can drastically improve the mission-critical outcomes for each of the organization's members and ultimately the publics they serve. Modeling the network architectures while heeding the precepts of the second law of thermodynamics can provide a frame of reference from which sound networked operations can be engineered, implemented, and most importantly, maintained. Using an organic modeled approach for this research focus, which is apropos of the studies conducted in other areas of the applied sciences, systems engineers can effectively study and more clearly understand the inherent properties of the networked systems which propagate the successful, sustainable, and effective operations of a multi-linked, cloud-based, networked operation. The disaster response research focus lends itself quite nicely to the study of ICT-related network management and provides a methodology that can guide a study's direction, its findings, and eventual recommendations for sound network construction and operations. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy is a measure of the level of disorder within a system. The theorem continues, entropy of an isolated system never decreases because isolated systems spontaneously evolve toward thermodynamic equilibrium, the state of maximum entropy. Or restated for our purposes, entropy is a condition that represents the maximum uselessness of a system network which has not been properly maintained. This concept applies to organic human systems as well as to mechanical and computing technologies. In the modern microscopic interpretation of entropy in statistical mechanics, entropy is the amount of additional information needed to specify the exact physical state of a system given its thermodynamic specification. In information theory, entropy is defined as a measure of unpredictability of informational content. Information, or more importantly, its inherent value, if neglected, will degrade over time. It is often used in the ICT realm to denote the probability of loss of intrinsic value of information. In a knowledge-based environment, information that has not been refreshed or updated within an appropriate time frame will lose its currency and thus its effectiveness. When we view information, or more broadly, the use of information for knowledge management purposes, as a key networking resource, the value of data capture, processing, distribution, maintenance, and revitalization must be factored into the strategic plan as a cost of doing business. To provide these services, organizations are spending increasingly larger percentages of their budgets to maintain their intrinsic knowledge bases as well as on their cloud-based network relationships with other member associates. The advantages of using cloud computing as the foundational structure of knowledge networks is that organizations specializing in specific content or process-oriented cloud computing core functions can maintain the currency and effectiveness of these network systems for a fraction of the cost of what their individual members would spend. This concept is an updated version of the old mainframe era timeshare model, but with a much greater capacity for increased inclusion. Borrowing further from the tenets of thermodynamics, we can more closely examine the beneficial leverage multiplier effect achieved by association, known as synergy. Synergy is the interaction of multiple elements in a system to produce an effect different from or greater than the sum of their individual effects. Synergistic networking and synchronization is a tactic that relies completely on the prevention of information systems from falling prey to the malaise of entropy. Entropy experienced by a system or a system's component which has not been properly maintained can sub-optimize the potentiality of an entire network. Individual companies and governmental agencies networking together can provide a more sustainability and a more powerfully compatible use with single source organizations. Open access to these organizational networks by their intended stakeholders will provide a significant synergistic leverage. Using public data collected over the past many years by government and non-government organizations internationally as well as domestically, we now have a data-packed, real-life laboratory that provides a microscopic assessment of the critical success factors associated with the successful operations of networked organizations. Investigations into the organic nature of the networked web associations and their formations, operations, maintenance, and sustainability now can be accurately observed and represented by the big data collected and made available by reliable, trusted sources. These sources maintain massive, objective, and independently substantiated data banks that are extremely useful in monitoring the various levels of organically grown networked efficiencies. Network engineers and organizational developers now have scientifically validated data sets regarding networked effectiveness that can be used to measure organizational goals and objectives against actual outcome results. This data can be structured in a way to analyze the level of network efficiencies based on the difference between stated goals and actual goal attainment. This can be done without compromising the proprietary nature of data, which must be openly shared and available to network partners in order to harness the dynamic power of the network value web. In the realm of massive cooperative response capability and operations, which normally takes place in the wake of an unanticipated tragic human disaster, we find a venue from which to closely observe levels of network efficiencies. These network interactions will either foster a strong, successful response or fail to do so. The rich vein of data that can be mined from the information collected by government agencies provides the quantifiable evidence needed to assess the demonstrated levels of networked efficiencies. Heaton found that negative attributes are systemic in nature and are indicative of an organization that lacks a coherent set of enlightened core values and the ability to grow organically. A closed organizational philosophy will actually contribute to the level of entropy and sub-optimize its effectiveness. In other words, the technological operations of the networks can work effectively, but it is the organizational structures that, if not properly maintained and nurtured, produce the entropy that is devastating to the effectiveness of the network structures. This is precisely the situation which lends itself to the obvious need of employing an organic organizational development strategy to expand the network's ability to provide synergistic operational leverage and to avoid interagency suboptimization. Organizations that seek to succeed in the new global reality that requires cooperation will have to operationally realign their strategic and tactical plans to work effectively with other organizations in this new collaborative-oriented environment. They will need to form new networks and be able to interact with international partners and stakeholders in real time, synchronizing to this new global environment of integration. In summary, the world is rapidly changing, and not only in the area of social demographics, politics, and economics, but also in the way technology has evolved and organizations cooperate to gain operational efficiencies. This situation has led to the recognition that powerful networks of groups and individuals have replaced the traditional interaction between people as individuals and their organizations, institutions, and the businesses with which they interact. Successful organizations can no longer operate in the same old traditional manner of yesteryear. Long-term survival will depend on an organization's ability to recreate themselves in an operationally viable networked entity that is compatible with the demands of this new era of complex, instantaneous, and ubiquitous response ability. Explicit information, training, and educational programs on how to develop the necessary global knowledge and competencies to use the effective tools for organizational change and synchronization recommended in this module can be found in the portal of the archives of the San Diego Global Knowledge University. I invite you to consider their competency certification and degree programs as the key to a new world of opportunity and achievement. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Let's now go to Module 2 of this program.